Hello and welcome to Hank Games Without Hank. My name is John Green, manager of the AFC Wimbledon Wimbly Womblys, starring John Green and Autobio Akinfenwa. The great hope for the future of our club today, enjoying a little bit of League One football, hanging out in the third tier. As you can see, 2 points clear of Bristol City at the top of the table. Both those top two teams are advanced to the championship. Glad to be here, living the dream. Couldn't be happier. Meredith, I can't help but notice that we haven't played the franchise from Milton Keynes. I don't know if they got relegated at the exact same time that we got promoted, or if they're in the championship or what, but I am enjoying it. As you can see, Autobio Akinfenwa with the second highest score. Can you show me? Oh, it's beautiful. DFTBA Nerdfight Terrier right there on the back of the jerseys. And YourGolfTravel.com, your source for all of your golf travel needs. YourGolfTravel.com, a fellow Wimbledon sponsor. Support them when you travel for golf. So speaking of how old you aren't, very few of you listening to this or watching this probably have ever experienced a presidential election before where there was, in the United States, where there wasn't an incumbent. So the last one we had was 8 years ago. What was that loud noise? No one knows. Oh, it was autoplay. Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys plays for this team. I don't know who we're up against. Is it Crawley Town? It's delightful to see Brian Wilson, who is not a young man, having a second career as a footballer. No, it's Oldham Athletic. So anyway, every 4 years, usually an incumbent president is running for re-election. Those presidential elections in the United States tend to be somewhat less horrifying and filthy than the ones where there is a sort of an open field. For one thing, really all incumbent politicians in U.S. politics have a big advantage. That means that a lot of times sort of the most promising candidates don't even bother. Oh, it's a beautiful start. Oh, it's John Green. We don't sing his name anymore because he's leaving the club for Germany, and we're still a little hurt. But it's a great finish, and I appreciate the fact that he's playing hard for Wimbledon while he's here. In a funny story, he just asked me for a raise, and I was like, listen, man, I'd be happy to give you a raise, except that I can't, because you have already you've already agreed to go to Germany at the end of your contract. So, point being, the level of like political discourse and vitriol is always worse when it's an open election with no incumbent running, at least in presidential politics in the U.S. That's always the case, right? Like, I mean, I remember it was the case in 2000. It was definitely the case in 1992, the year that Bill Clinton was first elected. Could it be? Oh, it's just a dream start. A dream start for the Wimbly Womblys, and look at that big man do a cartwheel. Oh, he's big, he's round, he's worth 10 million pounds. Akinfenwa. God, what a finish. He's the future of our club, Meredith. We can all rest easy because we are going to be resting on his beautiful big shoulders. Oh, what a time to be alive. So I remember in the election of 1992, it was really nasty. And like the things that people said about Bill Clinton. I mean, people said that Bill Clinton had a guy killed, a friend of his who'd committed suicide. There was this big conspiracy theory that he'd had that friend murdered, essentially, and that he hadn't committed suicide at all, but had rather, was about to like reveal something about the Clintons, and so the Clintons had him murdered. You might hear that come back, actually. I don't know, in 2016, since we're astonishingly have political dynasties in America now, such that brothers and spouses are running for office left and right. Although again, that's also always been part of American history. I mean, we had a father and we had a father and son team who were, the second and fifth president of the U.S. None of this seems that new to me, is my point. And while it is frustratingly vitriolic and the quality of discourse is just terrible and nobody's listening to each other and it's extremely polarizing, I don't want people to feel. I don't know. I want to see it in a historical context, and I think in a historical context, it is worse than it has been certainly in my lifetime. It is not the worst that it has been in American history. I mean, we fought a civil war, so certainly things can and perhaps will get worse. Oh, Akinfenwa just lets it glance off his head. Probably just needed to put it in the path of other John Green. But we have scored 3 goals in 28 minutes, so maybe I shouldn't complain too much. So I think that what we're seeing, how different is what we're seeing now from 1992 or from 2000 is the question that I've been asking myself recently. For those of you who don't follow American politics closely, the polarization levels are extremely, extremely high. I mean, I think that in both parties, there's a lot of conflict within the party, and then there's certainly very little like crossover between the parties and the individual positions of the various parties. Like, oh, Reevesy, it is different from 1992, and it's different from 2000, and it's different from 2008. Although in 2008 you saw, I guess you didn't, at least in my opinion, see the kind of like open, brazen, just racism that you see now. That's one thing that's probably different. And then I also don't know. Oh, off the post. I also feel like in 2000 there was in 2008 there was a sense of enthusiasm among voters, especially Obama voters, that you probably don't have this year. I think this year there's more anger. It seems to be more fueled by on both sides by a sense of anger, a feeling of disenfranchisement, a lot of which I think is valid. I mean, one of the reasons voters feel disenfranchised from the political system is that they feel like the political system is a little bit, rigged by donors. And I think that is that's valid. I mean, at some point in this, if people aren't funding elections, if elections are being funded primarily by corporations, the people who are being elected are answerable to those corporations in a way that they aren't necessarily answerable to the people who technically vote for them. I think that I still think that America is a democratic country. I don't buy the argument that we've become this oligarchy or this kleptocracy or anything like that. I mean, it's certainly not any more than we have been in the past. The U.S. is a much more politically open place than it was 50 years ago or 30 years ago. More people are allowed to vote than. I mean, the other thing is that I remember a little bit the last kind of big political shift in the U.S. At least as far as I know, the Reagan Revolution, and I feel like politics are more inclusive now than they were. They're also more polarizing, but I feel like that we, despite some of the voter laws that we've had that restrict access to voting in ways that I think are very difficult to justify constitutionally or otherwise, and I think the courts are starting to bear that out a little bit. Like right now, for instance, there are all kinds of rules about in some states that you can't vote unless you bring certain kinds of ID that can be difficult for some people to get. And then if you move in the middle of an election cycle, it can be difficult to update your ID in time and in the right ways. And sort of the more people move. We gave up a goal. The more people move, the more it affects, disproportionately affects people who are young and people who are poor, because those are the people most likely to move, the people who are least likely to have, to update their, to pay the $70 or whatever you have to pay to update your driver's license every time you change your address. And so there are laws out there that I do think disenfranchise a lot of legitimate voters, or at least make it needlessly complicated for a lot of voters to vote. Those laws are supposedly at least intended to prevent fraud. There isn't a lot of evidence that there is much election fraud or voter fraud in the United States, or really even any. But which is why I'm a little bit dubious of that supposedly being the reason. But when I look at the U.S. politics right now, I see a lot of people saying this is the worst it's ever been, and I just don't think that's true. I almost think it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, if we say it's the worst it's ever been, that makes it worse. Because it makes it harder for us to talk to each other. It makes us feel more despondent. It makes us feel less have less faith in our political institutions. And I don't think that holds up to scrutiny, really, to say that it's the worst it's ever been. I mean, for most of American history, most adults couldn't vote because they were either, oh God, now it's 3-2, because they were either not male or not white. And I mean, for much of American history, you couldn't vote if you didn't have property. So I think that, we continue to have a fairly open political system relative to our history. And maybe an own goal. Dang it. That's my favorite kind of goal, is own goals. And I continue, while I am very concerned about the role that large donors play in funding. Oh no, Shia LaBeouf! Play in funding political campaigns, particularly national political campaigns, but also really local ones. And while I do think that is a kind of like eventually an existential problem to democracy in the U.S. as we know it today. Oh, thank gosh. We're not there, right? Like, we aren't there. That's all I can say. And so I hope not that this can be a good election process, because it clearly can't be. It's going to be a dark and difficult few months for this country. But I hope that we can emerge from it and can move forward as a shared nation with a shared national identity, instead of letting it truly split us apart, because that does freak me out. All right. Sorry for ranting. Thanks for watching. We won 3-2 by the skin of our teeth. Best wishes.